Welcome to the CXO and CHRO Walk into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. Dive into a unique narrative with our hosts, Michelle Strasburger, the insightful CHRO, and Dominique Sanfleur, the visionary CXO. Together, they bring dynamic perspectives that ignite thought-provoking dialogue from the C-suite. Each week, join us for electrifying sessions that confront the very challenges modern CXOs navigate in today's fast-paced business landscape. When split-second decisions loom, must it be talent or revenue that takes the hit? Or is there a harmonious crossroad where both can thrive? Can we blur the lines between talent and revenue? In every episode, we provide executive leaders with 3 strategic takeaways, transformative insights that will propel you to master the delicate balance between people and profit. It's not about winners or losers, but crafting an environment where everyone triumphs. Tune in and step closer to redefining executive success.
Hey.
Hello, happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. It's here already.
It is here already. Hopefully good plans for the weekend.
Yeah, we're going to go to the Cape.
That's okay. Nice. I wish I had, as fun plans, but it's just going to be a regular, relaxing weekend for me, which is a good thing.
Yeah, that's always good. Relaxing is good. It's good. So welcome, everyone. I am Michelle Strasburger. I'm the CEO of HR Rebooted, where we work with organizations to build intentional cultures to help them scale without losing their souls.
Absolutely. And I'm Dominique St. Fleur, CEO of Intramark. We create a data layer over the workforce to help leaders identify hidden risks like productivity gaps and potential departures in mission critical roles.
Awesome. And today we are talking about communication strategy and how do we look at transparency?
We're communicating about communication.
I was thinking the same thing before we jumped on. We're communicating about communication.
And I like our title. And thanks for putting that up. What does transparency look like? I like the little kind of double meaning there.
But that was your idea. That was a good one.
It was a joint effort. And I think you selected the topic first and foremost. And I think it's a very timely topic, very great topic to have. I'm excited to jump into it. Michelle, do you want to set us up and then we get going?
Yeah, well, it's one of those things I think that I think leaders struggle with. And I think it's one of those things that can really set you apart and set your culture apart and can be a strategic competitive advantage. And when we were talking about this and we put it into ChatGPT to say, what are boards really thinking about? One of the things that my chat came back with was boards are actively seeking strategies to mitigate risks while positioning their organizations for growth and long-term resilience in this dynamic environment. And I think communication can be one of those things that really can be a strategic competitive advantage and can help build a resilient team if you're doing it right, especially in tough times. And I think it's something that we just miss the mark on in a lot of organizations, that we're not communicating enough. I think we wait to communicate because we don't have all the information. And I think as leaders, we think we're supposed to have all the information. And so we're afraid to communicate when we don't have enough. We're afraid of those questions. I was chatting with my coach today and we were talking about having conversations. And I'm like, well, I'm afraid of the questions they're going to ask me. Why would I put myself out there when I don't have all the answers, right? And I think that's true for a lot of CEOs. Like, why would I don't have all the answers yet. So why would I put myself out there?
In this time, you hit it on the head where, communication could either be a risk or an opportunity. Right. And it doesn't matter if it's a risk or an opportunity in good or tough times. Right. In good times, it could be a risk or opportunity. In bad times, it could be a risk or an opportunity. Again, to your point, if it's done right, especially during bad times or tough times, right? You could really take a situation and really, help turn it around with great communication strategy. It's a tricky balance because if you don't communicate enough, you don't have alignment. That's the risk.
Mm-hmm.
You communicate too much, right? You have noise, panic, uncertainty. So you've got to have the balance right. And I do think it's an area that a lot of people, just people in their personal lives and business lives get wrong, right? And so certainly leaders being human will get this wrong within their organizations. We get communication in general wrong as people. And so really, I think this discussion is going to help us dig into, at least from a corporate perspective, or organizational perspective, what are some best practices or things to look out for when it comes to communication strategy and, just best practices that we've seen. One, to just kind of tee us off here, one thing I've seen done well, and Michelle, you mentioned this during our conversation, is that you have to repeat. You can't assume that you put out the email or that communication, however it may look like, it's on the internal intranet, and people that statement, well, I put it on the XYZ board, or I sent that email, right? You have to communicate key points multiple times. Michelle, you had a number that you suggest that I'd love, for you to just kind of walk us through just kind of where that came from and inspiration. But in one of my previous roles, the CEO that was one of the things that he, to his leadership team, advised, was that if you can't assume people just pick things up the first time you say it, you have to communicate it a certain number of times, different venues, and that's part of the strategy. It has to just be communicated multiple times, same point, if you want it to stick. And Michelle, love for you to build on that.
Yeah, the studies showed it was 13 times, and I think it's important that when you think about, as leaders, we hear things all the time, right? We're talking strategy all the time. We're talking our goals all the time, but your frontline employees aren't hearing it all the time. They hear it from you once a quarter, maybe. And so are there ways that you can communicate it in a way where it's sticky? One of the organizations I worked for, one of their goals was to grow 5 times in 5 years. And so their way of saying it was 5 by 5, and they had it on screensavers. They had it on mouse pads back in the day when we had mouse pads as giveaways or tchotchkes. It was 5 by 5, 5x5. And everybody knew what 5 by 5 meant. And because it was just constantly out there, right? Their values were in everything. They were on the wall. They were in all the conversations, because it wasn't just something they hung on the wall. It was something they talked about all the time, over and over and over again. I wouldn't stop at 13. And I am not a person that likes to repeat myself. So it's painful. But as a leader, if you want something to be memorable, you have to say it over and over again. And you have to be that parrot and that repeatable. It has to be repeatable. And it has to be something people can remember.
And one pitfall with this, right, is 13 times is good for one thing, not 13 things 13 times. So I think choosing very wisely what you want people to, there's a lot of important information, and there's people are bombarded with a ton. And all of it, a lot of it's important, maybe some of it's not, whatever it may be. But you as a leader, you have to decide, what you want to communicate specifically, and keep it to a one key point, one rally, one kind of central message to really start aligning culture, behavior, thought share around that. Communicating 13 things 13 times is just going to be a little bit of overload for anyone. So what's that central message, that you want people to rally around. And to your point, Michelle, it's not putting it on some, wall somewhere on a poster and hoping that counts as the infinite 13 times. It's got to be communicated in multiple venues by the same leader, ideally the CEO, multiple times, so that people really understand what's important, right? So that 13 number, I think, is very, very important. And I'll add 1 by 13. I think that should be the framework. You should have a 1 by 13. One thing you communicate 13 times at least, and that's it. And so I think that's definitely a pitfall for organizations, is either not communicating the same thing often enough, or communicating too many things all at the same time, and not picking the central message.
Right. And it was like 15 years ago, I worked for that organization, and I still remember a very long time. And I still remember that message. And there have been other companies I've worked for that I can't tell you what the strategy was. I still remember that message because it was easy, it was memorable, it was sticky. So it's, and it wasn't too many things coming at you, to your point. It was that one consistent message that we stuck with for that long-term strategy.
I was literally on a call recently, and what the leader was describing as a challenge within their organization was, leadership, their understanding of what the strategy is and what the priorities are, gap difference with what the typical employee understands the priorities and the strategy is, right? And so leaders, you spend all this time in boardrooms, and it gets repeated to you quite often, at least we hope. But to the typical, to the masses, it at any organization almost, you can walk around and start asking, what's the strategy, and start to get, you could ask 10 people and get 11 answers, right? And so that communicating that central theme, central message 13 at least times is super important, because that misalignment, that's what happens when something's not communicated often enough.
Right. And not easy enough for people to grab onto as well.
That's
I also want to talk about that kind of that feeling of like not having all the answers. So I remember when the George Floyd tragedy happened, and I was on a call with my HR rebels, and we were talking about what everybody's doing in their organizations as a response. And I went to my CEO afterwards and I said, CEO, we have to do something. We have to say something. And he was like, because I don't want to make a mistake and step in something and offend somebody, which was fair. And say, I would rather say nothing because I don't know what to say. And I said, okay. I said, I hear you. But I said, when you don't say something, right, you don't give people a message, they make up a message. And it's usually not the message you want them to have, right? And so I left him with that. And he asked a couple of people in the leadership team, and he came back to me and he said, okay, we have to say something. He came back around. He said, but I don't know what to say or what to do. And so he said, let's put together a task force and ask people in the organization what we should do. And that's what we did. And I think that was a really great message of like, you don't have to do it alone. And I think sometimes at the CEO level, or the executive level, we feel like we have to have all the answers, but we don't. And so you can go out and ask, you can create a task force, and you can create messaging, use linking arms with other team members. And we went out to the distribution centers, and we went out to the sales team, and we went out to other leaders in the organization, and we pulled them together and we said, this is what's going on. And we're not quite sure how people feel and what we should do about it, and where there are pockets in the organization that we're maybe missing things with DEI. And so how should we respond? And that group put together the messaging, and it was a really great experience. And then they also put together the go forward plan. And so the CEO was able to say, this is what we want to do. This is what, this is the organization is looking into this, and this is their response, and we understand people are feeling this way, and so we put together this task force, and they are going to kind of take it from here. And so, I think it's okay to say, I don't know what to say, right? I don't have a response. I need your help with this. And I think showing that authenticity is really important.
I think you hit it on the head. That's a really great example of, especially when it's situations that aren't directly involved, that don't directly involve the organization, right? It's social. It's something that's happening out there. Everybody's talking about it. It's everybody's aware of it. And you don't want, you don't want to say something to say something, and just because everybody's saying something, right? So a lot of these sticky situations that are inside or outside the organization happen. But I think you're spot on, is that what that leader said initially is probably should be an important part of the communication. Is, I'm not sure what to say, because I want to be sensitive to what's going on, but this is whatever the case may be, there's a situation that that's culturally removed from me, or whatever it is, right? But I acknowledge the hurt and pain that, whatever it may be, right? So whatever the situation may be, saying that you don't know what to say, or you don't have an answer, but we're figuring that out together, and you're involving people,
right,
is always a good strategy, right? And I think that takes the pressure valve off of just the leader, and helps bring people into that circle, right? Because that's an invitation to get other people involved, and come up, and do a task force, or ask around, or have discussions to figure out, what's a good, because one leader's perspective, you don't want to, you have diverse perspectives you need to cater to as a leader. But I think that first initial vulnerability, or insecurity, if you will, that leader had is a great part of the message is, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And let's figure it out together. Boom.
I think that goes too for times where, you might have just done a riff, and you're talking to the team, and the first question they're going to say is there going to be another one? Right. And you want to say no, but you don't know what the future brings, and we're in uncertain times. Right. And it might be that answer of like, I'd like to say no, right? But I don't know. I don't know what the future brings. It's uncertain right now, but let's figure this out together. Right. And I want to say no. I want to say we made a pretty good cut. We cut deep, or whatever, whatever that is. But you can't say no, never. So, you're not always going to have all the answers, but having that moment of like, I'm not sure, is okay.
Now, this particular topic or example is an interesting one, because a conversation around riffs for a leader, right? Let's say the CEO, is happening on two fronts: one with the board, and one with the general employee population, right?
Yeah.
That's two very different conversations. They're very different messaging. And the trick is that those conversations are probably happening in very rapid succession, right? Mm-hmm. So a leader is in a situation where they have to switch context quite a bit, right? They have to switch context and speak to a board, have a board level conversation, switch context, and have, a leadership to employee level conversation. And those look like very different conversations. And what may happen is sufficient context switching doesn't happen, right? The leader may not calibrate, especially as those meetings are happening in flurry, to recalibrate themselves before they jump into those respective meetings, and may over-index naturally to the board side of things. And that may come through, that board speak, that board language may come through in communicating with employees, which is a mistake in a highly sensitive situation, right? So you don't want to put fuel on a fire in a riff situation and have people that you need to stay start leaving because your communication strategy is robotic or metrics driven or very formal, right? So I think that's an interesting situation because it's one of those situations where one leader has to communicate to two very different audiences in rapid succession, and that context and that switching needs to happen very effectively. The language and the disposition and tone needs to switch very, very quickly and effectively, meeting after meeting. And that's a tricky communication situation to be in for a leader. And I think leaders sometimes, kind of err on the metrics, numbers driven side, because that's where a lot of the conversations are happening day to day with, board level folks that need context into a riff, right? The conversations that they're having with the board members around a riff is very different, is probably more metrics driven than it needs to be, on the employee side.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then employees will read into that and say,
you don't care.
Sure that means that I'm staying long term.
Yep. You don't care. I'm just a number. I'm going to proactively go. One could think, oh, well, it's a riff anyway, and we want people. Not really, right? It's, you don't want to create a situation where your A players are starting to look out the door, and you don't get that messaging right. It's your A players that is going to start looking out the door, and you need to kind of manage that quite effectively.
Yep. Exactly.
Interesting. I think what helps with that is another point on context is it relates to the board level, employee level conversations, but sparing when communicating with a larger population to employee population, general employee population, sparing the numbers, right, is not, it's more about the context, explaining the why, behind things goes, much further than explaining the metrics, right? So let's take our riff example again, right? Like, as you can see, revenue went down from this quarter to this quarter, and therefore, very logical argument, very logical way of presenting information and why a riff must happen. However, diverse employee population that's made up of a mix of people that may be quantitatively forward and quantitatively not forward. What if those are proper terms? That you're going to lose people, right? And so that communication strategy, although that may be great for a board level discussion, really helping on the employee side is just explaining the why. In more just qualitative terms as much as possible, some quantitative but qualitative terms, keeping high level and doing it in a form of a story, a true story, of course, but you have to story tell in that situation more than show numbers or show and tell.
Right, because what the employee gets out of that is that it's just about the numbers. And even if you're showing good numbers, not during a tough time, but during good times of like, wow, look at how good our numbers are, let's move on. But it's the what's in it for me. When employees are sitting in a town hall, they really want to know what's in it for me. And so thinking about it when you're putting the communications together of like, what makes this important for the employees, right? What are they going to come to hear and get excited about? And so, how do you turn this around of like how we're going to pull this off after we've just gone through a riff and we're sharing the information, we're sharing how we're going to move forward. How do they play into that? How do they play into like the go forward plan? And how are we going to kind of win moving forward? I think would be more important than just showing the numbers.
That storytelling is critical. And that storytelling looks different, of course, in a board setting than employee setting, and the what's on the shoulder of that one leader is being able to effectively switch context. But there's some information that leaders can't communicate, right? Maybe there's a pending deal, acquisition, whatever it may be, and or something. Those sound like important things, but there are also certain things that don't meet that cut line as well, that leaders feel that they can't share, but kind of violate trust once that information comes out, right? So I think something like an M&A deal is understandable, to your point, Michelle, in our conversation that we've had before. But I want to toss the ball to you on certain, what is that cut line, and what's the consequences of not making the right decision of what to keep, close to the chest versus not, and the impacts of that.
It's interesting because I think like when you're in a small company, like a startup type organization, there's a level of expectation that you share, what the exit strategy is, and everybody gets behind it. And it's pretty commonplace to share, like at some point, the next 3 to 5 years, especially if you're in private equity, it's typically 3 to 5 years, we're going to sell. And everybody's behind that because there's typically some incentive. And there is a rally behind that. And so maybe in larger organizations, you can't typically have that because you might be on the stock exchange, and then there's laws behind that, and you can't share that information until it gets out. But maybe there's some other rallying cry you can get out there, like a certain target or number, or it's always great to be second place because then you have somebody to chase. Like, we're just going to beat the first place person. You've got that kind of rallying cry to go after. Isn't that the thing in Good to Great? You've got the second place, you get to go after the first place. But I think in building trust, if you don't have that, like, you can't communicate fully transparently on the big stuff. When you don't share the little stuff, you lose trust very quickly. And so the tactical stuff, like who's coming on board, who's leaving the organization, why certain decisions were made, or even letting decisions being made at the lower parts of the organization, like giving trust in the organization, and then or if you override a decision, communicating why that decision was made, helps maintain and build trust versus just overriding decisions and not sharing why, I think is important. Because the minute you stop sharing information and keeping things transparent, again, you're not giving people a story, so they start making up their own story. And the story is, they don't trust me, or there's something going on, right? When you start to when leaders start to disappear, or people start to disappear, and I don't understand why, and I only find out because I got their out of office, especially if I'm working remotely, or that person worked in a different office and I don't see them every day. You didn't tell me because something happened. Right. So there's a secret there. And then if they're in key roles like HR or finance, like, ooh, they knew something, that's why they left. So you start to diminish trust significantly, and it could be very innocent. And so why wouldn't you then communicate that so that you can build trust? Even if it's a difficult story, that story is better than what people will make up.
100%. I think you hit it on the head. I think that was a great example, right? Especially if an organization's kind of going through shaky times. You're going to want to explain any departure, because you don't want people to start filling in the blanks on their own, right? Mm-hmm. To your point, why did that person in HR or finance leave? Because they have access to very sensitive and privy information. And, they're usually the quote unquote first to know, about, outside the leadership team, right? They're usually the first to know, right? Finance sees the numbers, like it's kind of high, or HR may kind of see the hiring trends, where, the rest. And if, you don't want people assuming departures and key functions like that, or key leadership, you especially if things are shaky, you have to have an explanation, even if it's a mid-level departure or junior departure. If the organization, and again, organization size matters, so we could be applying this to like a business unit, for example. But generally speaking, having what you don't want is unexplained departures and multiple. So that starts to be a problem, big time. And so that'll make a bad situation worse. So I think that was a really good example there. And you calling out those specific functions was interesting because that's a, to your point, it could be innocent, but that's the dot that's where people's minds will immediately go. And so.
Well, so this is an extreme example, and nobody planned to communicate this. This just happened. But the astronomer situation with the CEO and CHRO, they're no longer with the organization. Everybody knows why. It's very public, right? But it's out there. Nobody communicated it, right? But it's out there. It's there. They can move on. Everybody's moving forward. Nobody's talking about it. I feel bad for everybody involved. I feel bad they have to deal with this, but they can face it. They can move on, and they have a road in front of them to just move on, right? And there's no, I'm sure there's some chatter, but there's no guessing on what happened to that person and why are they no longer in the seat. And it slows down productivity. And it slows down, it just slows down work, and it creates a muck in the organization when you could just, you don't want to share if that's going on in the organization. You probably don't want to share that, right, to that extent, but you could share that they're no longer with the organization and we're going to backfill the position. We wish them the best and we're going to move on. And so you can kill whatever kind of guesswork is there and move forward.
Yeah, and I think to the extent that it's possible or advisable, a general category of why, that separation had to happen, right, is usually useful, right? Maybe there was, whatever the category may be, unethical behavior that we felt, or behavior or policy violations, whatever it may be, right? Yeah. Some kind of category, without getting into details, is helpful because people need to know why, not just the what. And, if people, you got to put people in a position where they're not filling in as many blanks as they possibly can. You got to fill in as much of the blanks as possible to keep people from sensationalizing, right? You have to kind of think about a group think environment or how crowds behave, right? So you gotta kind of manage that.
They could just move on. Right. I also err on the side of more transparency versus not, so that it takes the guesswork out of it and people can just go back to work and get back to normalcy.
I agree. It's your mention about productivity is an important one, right? Because what you don't want is a bunch of employees or people and teams second guessing themselves, second guessing their second guessing their work, and worried about other things that uncertainty is a really big productivity killer. And so the more of that you have, human nature is just gonna the brain is just not gonna work well with the typical person under uncertainty, right? That uncertainty sounds great for an executive, right? That's kind of, if an executive is going for a position, yes, I thrive under uncertainty and, yada, yada. Great. Okay. That's good for the interview. But sitting in seat, most employees are not going to be inviting the "I thrive under the uncertainty" or whatever it is. That's not how that's going to translate. And that type of uncertainty, or uncertainty in general, for the general population, general employees, that is not a good thing. That is a productivity killer, to your point. And you got to alleviate that as much as possible so that people, good, bad, or ugly, can focus their heads, get back to work, and knowing what they're working for, and just again to your point, move on, move forward. Right?
Yep.
You've got to put them in the position to just move forward. So
absolutely. So let me see if I can recap. So we have to communicate often, communicate the trivial stuff so you can build trust, and communicate even if we don't have all the information. So don't wait until it's too late.
I agree. And, I throw in there context matters, right? Communicating in context matters. Communicating to the board and communicating to employees is very different. Most people know that, but that becomes more difficult in very fast-paced situations. Think about a RIF, right? Very, very, where the context is switching quite a bit potentially. And so those are particularly important situations to get behind. And, to your point, Michelle, as well, I throw in, give people the why so that they're not filling in the blanks. You gotta give them the story so that they don't make it up on their own. And, they could, again, your words, move forward. I think that's the best thing to do to keep people focused. Otherwise, that uncertainty will be that productivity killer quite a bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Great
Good
conversation
stuff.
again.
As always.
Looking forward to next week.
Indeed.
Well, we'll see everyone at the bar next Thursday.
You got it. Is Neha in the background?
I think she is. Thank you, Neha.
Neha, thank you so much.
You've just experienced another episode of The CXO and CHRO Walk into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. Thank you for joining us. Please join us next week at noon Eastern for more strategic content to help you scale your business. You can follow us on LinkedIn and on YouTube for additional content or episodes you may have missed. The links will be in the comments section. If you'd like more information or to schedule time with Michelle or Dominique, follow the link in the comments section to book time on their calendar. Until next week, cheers.